Everybody, welcome. I cannot believe that we are now on episode number 21 of Discussions with the Pros. This is incredible. We have a very special guest, a very special and generous guest with us tonight, Raj Sabharwal from Glass Revolution Imports. Raj, welcome. Thank you very much for being here tonight. I just wanted to give everybody a few quick notes before we get started. Many of the people here got samples. If you got samples, it's because you have attended many of our prior sessions. So we just keep track of who attends, and the people who attend are the ones who get samples. But, you know, obviously, if you want to taste things afterwards, we can talk later. I might have some extras and stuff as well. As far as the samples tonight are concerned, we have a lot of samples. Raj was way too generous, which is awesome, of course. But I want everybody to be careful here because we're going to be on for an hour. Pour yourself small samples, okay? You see here, little samples, okay? Don't drink out of the bottles. You want to pour small samples. Yeah, I see that look on your face, Paul. I get it. You know, if you want to be able to appreciate and taste these as we go on tonight. So what I want to do is I want to get started. We're going to be doing the sample tasting as the interview goes on. Raj, welcome. And as you and I discussed, you want everybody to start with the Murray McDavid Loch Lomond. So if you can do me a favor and just introduce yourself and tell us about that whiskey.
Great, thanks, Gil. Glad to be here. I know it's been some time in the making, so quite happy that this is a good way to start the new year. So one of the brands we import is Murray McDavid, who is an independent bottler. And I thought we'd start with something light. This Loch Lomond, for those of you who know, makes both a single grain and single malt. This is Murray McDavid, 19-year-old Loch Lomond. It's a single grain, but it's unusual because it's actually 100% malted barley. And the reason they can't call it a single malt is because it was distilled in column distills. So if it was, single malts have to be distilled in pot stills. So because this was still distilled in column stills, it has to be labeled a single grain.
And what's this aged in?
This is aged in ex-bourbon casks.
Okay. So, it's funny that you call it single grain, because of the labeling. I would think that if it were labeled single malt, it would probably, like on the shelves, it would sell better, right? I mean, there's a difference between single malt and single grain in the eye of the consumer.
Well, there is, but I'm a big proponent of single grain whiskeys. I mean, I always call it the other Scotch, because single grain, basically, most of 90% of what comes out of Scotland are blends, and blends would not exist if it wasn't for single grains, because grain whiskey goes into the blends as a component along with the other malts. And single grains follow the same, regulations. Has to be aged for a minimum of 3 years. The big difference in most single grains is that because they're continually distilled, most of them, because they're used for blends, aren't the highest quality, but you do get distilleries, single grain distilleries, that put them into really good quality casks, or in the case of having independent bottlers like Murray McDavid, Blackadder, Five Lines, other ones that we import, they make sure they're using really good quality casks. And you can get like a 30-year-old single grain, single cask for like $250, $260, which if you were buying a single malt, it would be double that.
Oh, easily. It could be at least 500 or more, especially depending on the name too.
Exactly.
Interesting.
And to me, those single grains, if you have friends who say, "Oh, I only drink bourbon," this is a great introduction to Scotch. For them, don't tell them what it is. A lot of people will think it's a bourbon because it's 100% corn. It is column distilled. But for a 19-year-old aged whiskey, it's quite delicious.
Yeah, no, this is, and you're right. It is light, and I think it's smart of you to start off with something light like this, because if we started off with fusion, that would just mess everybody up,
Yeah.
And speaking of fusion, what was the first year that you participated in Binny's World of Whiskeys? Do you know what year that was approximately?
That probably was 2010, I'm going to guess.
Okay, that sounds right, because I think that I've known you for about 10 years. And I remember going to your table, and I remember that you're the first person, you introduced me to these, and you ran me through the lineup. And that night, actually, I bought a bottle of the peated, okay, the peated Amrut, which is delicious, and I tasted the Amrut. So talk to me about your role of being an importer. Okay, we've had Sam Filmus, okay,
Yep.
here, from Impex. And I'm going to ask you the same question that I asked him. How do you decide what distilleries are worthy of being imported by your company?
That's a great question. I mean, we sort of focus on or specialize in whiskey, single malt whiskeys. That's our forte. And we prefer, I mean, obviously as an importer, you're either, working with the big brands, or where you can't, then you end up working with smaller brands. And so we actually prefer to work with small family-owned distilleries or family-owned operations, where we have a direct connection to the supplier. So if we have, I know this is a question you had for later, but if we've got some comments or inputs, we think this would work for the market or this wouldn't. We have the ability to say that and sort of steer what is being provided us by the supplier based on what we think the market is ready for, would like. As an importer, we are the first source of bringing anything into the U.S. So nothing that we import would be here if it wasn't for us. And
okay.
then we sell. Because of the three-tier system in the U.S., we then have to sell to distributors or to states that are state-controlled, and then they in turn sell to bars and restaurants, etc. Unfortunately, currently we cannot sell directly to bars and restaurants consumers. It's getting a little interesting because there are some e-commerce sites, and in fact, if you go onto our website, there are a number of products that we have on there that you can buy directly. It's backroom operations, so we're not selling it directly, but it's available through our website.
What's the website? What's the URL, just so that people know?
www.glassrev, GLASSREV.com.
Glassrev.com?
Yeah, so it's glassrevolution.com,
Okay.
glassrev.com, and on there. And I encourage people, hey, if you want to know more about what we're bringing in, and we do a variety of different tastings and different events, and sign up for our newsletter. That's where you'll get information. We have a lot of exclusive releases that we offer to our audience. A lot of times we're bringing in stuff from independent bottlers, and we may only have 60 or 90 bottles for the entire country.
Wow. How do you decide then who gets what?
Well, so there are some key accounts, some key retailers that have always supported us, and they tend, or key distributors that will tend to get some. And now we're starting to keep a little bit, maybe a couple of cases that are going to be available through our website. So that way it has a larger reach, because you can imagine if we have 60 bottles of something, that could all go to one retailer. And we don't.
Sure, absolutely. This group here by itself, we could buy it all. I mean, this group.
Yeah. We've had that happen. We've sold a lot of single casks to clubs and groups, and in fact, we just did a single cask for a group at the Chicago Club. It'd be 12-year-old Kalila that's going to be delivered this week for them.
Nice. I think that I just said, as soon as it said 12-year-old Kalila, I know a few people's eyes just opened up a little bit, and I know them from all over the country who are doing that. Now, so the next whiskey, I just want to tell everybody before we hit this next whiskey, Waterford, that we're going to the Waterford Dunmore. Please, feel free to start drinking it. I ran into Brett Pontani this weekend. Okay, our friend from Binny's, and I told him that we were interviewing you tonight, and he said, "Oh, great, what's the lineup?" And I told him, and he said, "Waterford, good stuff." Okay, so I'm thrilled to try the Waterford. Let me tell you that when Eric, Michael Bloom, and I were pouring these samples, it took all of our willpower to not taste it yet. So I'm actually having my first taste tonight as well. So please tell us about Waterford Irish. What makes it special? And what are we about to drink?
It's special because it's foremost a single malt that just happens to be made in Ireland. So don't nose this or taste this, assuming that it will be an Irish whiskey. It is 100% malted barley. It is made exactly the same way it would have been made in Scotland, double distilled, double pot distilled, aged in a variety of different casks. And what's interesting, so the connection between Mary McDavid and Waterford is Mark Reynier, who is most known for having resurrected Bruichladdich, started Mary McDavid in the mid 90s as an independent bottler, and then when he sold Bruichladdich in 2014, he wanted to start something. I can't remember, 2012 or something. He wanted to find something else, and one thing that he asked his head of distilling at Bruichladdich was, "Where is the best barley?" And without batting an eye, he said it's from Ireland. And if you've ever been to Ireland, I mean, Ireland has such different microclimates and different conditions. It's further south than Scotland, obviously, and allows for a great growing season, great varietals. So the team at Waterford set out to source barley from different farmers. So what you're drinking right now, the Dunmore, is what's called a single farm origin. So all the barley came from one farm, the Dunmore farm. It was harvested, dried, malted, distilled, and aged separately. No other barley was influenced in there. And,
okay, so let me ask you a question, because Brett mentioned that to me. He said that one thing that makes the different bottlings unique is that you're dealing with essentially single harvests from single farms, right?
Right. Yep.
Okay. Fascinating.
So one of the big things that Waterford, Mark and his team set out to do was try to prove that there's terroir in whiskey. And that's very contentious. There's all kinds of proponents that say, no, nonsense, there isn't. There certainly can be in wine, and the wine trade has always talked about terroir, but how possibly can there be terroir in whiskey? And so, certainly by keeping all of these barley strains separate, and the first three Waterfords are going to try the same barley strain. They're all Irenia, all using the same yeast for fermentation, all coming off the still at around 71.5%. So 143, 142, 143 proof. And they're filled into the barrels at that strength as well. So, that's.
And then what is, and tell me about the barrels.
So that's a good question. So if you, I know Eric has the bottles there. Eric, if you pick up the bottle and look at the back of any of the bottles, or let's do the Dunmore, for example, you will see on the back of it, there is a terroir code. So if you go on to Waterford's site, terroir, you put it in the terroir code, it will tell you everything and more that you want to know about it.
Although you're making some people here very happy, because we've got some real geeks here. I mean, the fact that you started off with the word terroir so early makes Paul Barron just so freaking happy, because he almost always asks a question about terroir, and now you're talking about a code on the back of the bottle.
Yep.
I mean, that's like geek heaven right there.
You go onto the site, you put that in there, and there's everything. It'll tell you what the weather was like when it was planted. There's even like a little audio clip that you can listen to what the sounds of the farm are, and the soil conditions and all of that stuff. And it'll tell you exactly when it was harvested, how long it dried for, when it was malted, how long it was malted for, the fermentation period. And the interesting thing is all of these have 120-hour plus fermentation time, which is very, very long in whiskey talk. I mean, Scotland, most of the Scottish distilleries are probably doing maybe 72 hours, 65 to 72 hours. So Waterford's doing double that. And then distill, take very short cuts, distill at a high proof, and to barrel at that. So Dunmore all of the Waterfords have a combination of virgin American oak, ex-bourbon, new French oak, and then what they call Vendu Natural, which means basically fortified wine. So in this case, the Dunmore was in sherry. So,
okay, well, I got it. This is delicious. This is delicious, and I don't know if you've been reading the comments, but people seem to love this. And Eric, remember what we did for Jake before? You know, after this is all said and done, we can maybe send a list of all the comments to Raj in in an email. Okay,
Yeah,
so that
absolutely.
he can get them. That'd be great. You know, Raj, I don't want us to lose the sight of the fact that we have 4 of the whiskeys coming here right now. So since we did just taste the Dunmore, number 3 on our list is the Rathclaw. Am I pronouncing that correctly? Rathclaw?
Rathclaw.
Rathclaw. Okay. So what is the difference between the Rathclaw and the Dunmore?
Well, you know what? Try it and you tell me what the difference is.
You're putting me on the spot.
Other than the fact that this, you know, from a different farm, same barley strain again, still Armenia, same harvest, you know, came off the stills at the same time. I think the Rathclaw had a little shorter fermentation time than.
It seems a little hotter. It seems to me a little bit hotter. Okay, it drinks hotter.
But it is 50%, so that's interesting.
Yeah, to me, it drinks a little bit hotter, a little spicier. I don't know where I'm getting that spice from, but I'm getting a little bit spicier. And what about you, Eric? What are you getting in particular?
Actually, it's a little sweeter to me. I'm getting just a little bit spicier, but I'm getting a sweeter on the mouthfeel, and it's a it tastes a little bit richer, creamier.
I'm going to ask this, Eric, but when you say sweeter, I mean, sweet is not a flavor. So what are you getting? Vanilla, honey?
Honey.
Honey. Okay.
I'm getting a bit of honey too. I'm getting like clove honey.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. So there, I mean, so there you're tasting some of the differences. You're tasting, for lack of a better word, the terroir. Now, some people will say, well, the barrels, how much influence does that have on it? And certainly we all know that barrels, 60 to 70% of the flavor comes from barrels. But in this case, because everything is starting off the same, you should be able to taste and experience the raw material, what the raw material is delivering to these whiskeys.
And so what are the differences in what these have been aged?
I'm trying to pull that up. I've had that when we've done Waterford tastings, and I'm just trying to.
Don't worry about it. Actually,
it still had the same barrels, but it has had different percentages in each of the barrels. So they're all aged in these barrels, and then they're blended together before they're bottled.
Got it. Now, before we go on to the next one, I saw a little discussion on Facebook today with you and a few other people about tariffs, okay, and how tariffs are affecting the business. I mean, you import from different parts of the world. Can you tell us a little bit about how tariffs have been affecting your business? And this is before we go into the Amru. Tell us a little bit about the tariffs first.
Well, the tariffs, when they were introduced last year, in late 2019, really, put us for a loop, because all of a sudden a lot of our brands, and again, because we don't import directly from any Scottish distilleries, we are just bringing in products from independent bottlers. It gave us some leeway, but a lot of our brands that we already had registered to bring in, we had to add the 25% tariff on there. Luckily, with McDavid and all the ones we brought in, we already had some, and we brought in some more. They agreed to work with us on the tariff and absorb some of the cost on it. But some of we brought in a 30-year-old Blackadder Jura, 11-year-old Balmenic. I couldn't do anything about that. We had to add the tariff on there, so the 30-year-old Jura ended up selling for about $7.25 a bottle. But
Wow.
we're sold out.
725. That's
We're sold out. It was
wow.
Malt Maniacs actually gave that the best single cask award last year, and 90 points, which is really high for Malt Maniacs. If you guys follow Malt Maniacs,
Impressive.
but it was it's quite devastating to have that. It's totally unfair. Obviously, consumers, all of you, end up having to pay that. What we've tried to do is try to limit it. Once we add in all the costs to bring over product and do our margin, then we add the tariff on. So it's the exact tariff effect on there. But we can't control what the distributors are doing or what the retailers are doing.
Right, of course.
They're obviously adding their margin on to the full amount. And now, as of 2 days ago, the U.S. Trade Representative has added tariffs on brand or grape-based spirits, so brandy. So our cognac, which we were just about to order, is impacted by that.
Right.
So I'm saying, well, let's hold off bringing in some cognac or some Armagnac. And same with our single malts from Scotland. We've sort of held back on there. I've focused more on single grains. So the Loch Lomond as an example,
Right.
Blackadder, 31-year-old Canvas, 32-year-old Invergordon, and then also doing a lot of blended malts. So
Got it.
there is something in the industry called a teaspoon malt, where allegedly two sister distilleries, allegedly they'll put a teaspoon of the other single malt in there.
Oh,
so
to avoid taxes, right?
Well, not to avoid taxes. So you can't sell it as a single malt, and you can't put the name of the distillery on there. So Balvenie and Glenfiddich do a lot of this. So you'll might see something called Burnside, which is Balvenie with allegedly Glenfiddich in it.
Interesting.
The nice thing is that we can bring that in, not pay tariff on it, and probably sell like a 28-year-old Burnside, which is 99.9% Balvenie, for a lot less than a 28-year-old Balvenie single cask.
Right, but there's an issue there of then educating the consumer, because the consumer isn't going to know about it. And speaking of something that the consumer doesn't know about, let's talk about Amrut. Okay, so I got to tell you something. The first time that I tasted it, and you walked me through the story about how they get a faster maturation because of the angel share each year. Tell us about Amrut. Tell us about the distillery, because this is, I love Amrut. It's great stuff. So tell us about it.
So Amrut is the first brand that we ever started importing 10 years ago, and it's still the largest brand in our portfolio. Distillery started in 1948. It's family owned. They started making single malts in the late 70s, mostly to use in blending in their higher end whiskeys they were selling in the domestic market. And then in the 80s, the whole market changed in India because a lot of foreign men started making cheaper malts and adding more grain or neutral spirit to it. India is the largest consumer of whiskey in the world, but a lot of what's sold in India as whiskey could not be called whiskey anywhere else in the world, because it tends to be made from a neutral molasses spirit with either some a little bit of malt or a little bit of grain spirit, or in some cases a little bit of imported Scottish or Canadian whiskey added to it, and then sold as whiskey.
Is there a quality? Is there a quality control issue?
No. There's no regulations. There's more distilleries in India than there are in Scotland. There's about 400 some odd distilleries in India, and all of them, most of them are local, based in their states, and sort of supply the market locally. But Amrut had all these single malt casks sitting there, and they brought over some distillers from Scotland and had them try it, and they said, whatever you're doing, keep doing this. Is amazing. So in 2004, when Rick Jagdale, who was the son of the managing director, was doing his MBA thesis at University of Newcastle, and his dad said, well, why don't you do it on whether or not we'd be able to sell a single malt to the world? an Indian single malt. So as part of his research, they went to a pretty famous pub in Glasgow and told the barkeep, just pour this single malt for people. Don't tell them where it's from. Don't tell anything about it. We want to hear what they have to say. And people were, oh, it's a Highland, it's a Speyside, it's 10 years old, it's 12, it's 15. And, you know, when they were told, well, it's actually from India and it's like 4 years old. They were like, no way, it can't be, you know. And so they figured with all positive feedback, they had something good, possibly. So they introduced it in 2006 into the UK market and started getting notice about it. Back then they were actually chill filtering and adding caramel coloring to it and then bottling it at 40%. They quickly learned that wasn't the way to do it if you wanted to be a world-class single malt. So now nothing is chill filtered, no caramel coloring added to it. The classic single malt. Do people pour single malt now? No.
Yeah, we're on number 4, which is the Amrit single malt.
Just want to make sure people have it.
Yep.
So the Amrit single malt, 100% Indian barley. The barley grows in the north of India in Rajasthan and Punjab. And the unique thing about the Indian barley, it's 6-row barley rather than 2-row. So you're getting smaller granules, you're getting a lower yield, but you're getting a richer distillate that comes out of it. And one of the keys to Amrit's success and being able to make great whiskey is their angel share is 10 to 15% a year.
Mm-hmm.
And you compare that to Scotland, where it's 1 to 2% a year.
Right.
So Amrit likes to say 1 year in Bangalore is like 3 years in Scotland. On the equivalent of it. So, you know, the whiskey that's in your glass, that's 100% malted barley, Indian malted barley.
Mm-hmm.
Distilled at Amrit, which is in Bangalore, 3,000 feet above sea level.
Okay.
And aged in a combination of New American oak and ex-bourbon casks.
Okay.
And then bottled at 46%. The cask strength version of this is bottled at 61.8 or 123.6 proof.
I've had that. That's delicious. That is a great dram.
Delicious. And it's you know, it doesn't drink hot, doesn't drink that high alcohol strength. And one of the unique things too is because Bangalore's south central, it's above 3,000 feet above sea level. It has lower humidity, but warm temperatures. So winter is about 75 degrees, summer about 120.
Mm-hmm.
The humidity range 45 in the winter and about 70, 75 in the summer. So their maturation process is very similar to Kentucky. They actually lose more water because it's drier, so the alcohol strength goes up.
Got it.
But they're losing so much more. I mean, think of it, in 5 years, 50% of your barrel, if not more, has evaporated.
That's incredible. I mean, and think about what that means with respect to the number of bottles that you get and the cost. I mean, that's just fascinating. I noticed there's no age statement here, right? You know, this doesn't have an age statement, and it probably can't have one, right? It would be.
Well, it could. I mean, but it would say 4 years. I mean,
right.
But do we want to advertise a 4-year-old malt that obviously doesn't drink like a 4-year-old malt?
No, it doesn't drink like that at all.
And the number is just a number, but I like to say that these are more mature than their age is, right? So you have to talk about maturity of a whiskey rather than the age of a whiskey.
Got it. You know, when you read the comments, you'll see that a lot of the people here, we are actually less mature than our age, but that's a different issue. Once you read the comments, right? All right. So what I want to do, I'm going to ask you one other question because I know people are going to have comments and questions, and I have other questions that I can get to later if I need to. But I do have one question with respect to a new distillery, because there are many new distilleries coming up all over the world. Okay.
Yep.
You know, how long does it take? In your experience, does it take for a new distillery to warrant attention from the importing and exporting markets, from the public? How long does it take to get a good product?
Well, so these days, a lot of new distilleries are waiting until they're and one day old to release product. But that isn't necessarily good. But I think probably once a distillery releases product, so maybe 5 to 6 years from inception of when they started distilling, that length of time, you can taste the white dog or whiskey in waiting or whatever you want to call it, but that's not really reflective of what the finished product may necessarily be like. So in our case, I'll give you the prime example. We're about to start importing Bimber, London single malt, and I've been after them for probably about a year now. But late last year, we sort of came to terms, and we will have their product probably in March. But they're a small distillery. They do true craft. They're even doing their own floor maltings. They're doing everything from sourcing.
What was the name again? I didn't catch the name.
Bimber, Bimber.
Okay.
And but we're only, this is how small they are. We're only getting 3 single barrels for the U.S. this year. That's it.
Wow. And where's it going to go?
Well, so we're probably going to target 4 or 5 markets. So Illinois will be one of them. Vinny's will have it.
Okay.
It'll be New York, Illinois, Texas, and California, most likely.
God, I remember years ago, didn't you import something from North England, I think it was, or North London?
Yeah, we had the English whiskey company.
That was good. Yeah. I enjoyed that. You poured that for me. That was good stuff.
Yeah. So wait till you try Bimber. Bimber
is
fantastic. And the three we're going to get is one's virgin oak,
okay,
100% new American oak, one ex-bourbon, and one sherry.
And when's that coming in?
Probably in March. All cask strength, all single casks, and they will be 240, 250 bottles per cask, so not a lot.
What do you think the cost will be per bottle? We're getting a question about that.
Probably about $155 a bottle.
Okay. Oh, that sounds great.
That's, for the quality it is, it's great. So
wonderful. Eric, do you have any particular questions for Raj before we open it up to everybody else?
Well, I was originally going to ask about the terroir label on the back, but we talked about it. Yeah, these are amazing bottles. I love them. And they're just really, I think they're amazing and unique with the glass stopper and the coloring. I also noticed, which is going to be hard to see, but there's definitely a theme going on with the design between the single farm and the organic. Actually, and I guess I know we'll touch on the Gaia after the call's over, but I mean, what's the biggest difference between the single farm and the Gaia?
So the Gaia is all organic. However, there were not enough, no farm was producing enough organic barley to use a single farm. So the organic Gaia is actually sourced from six different farms, all 100% organic barley, all strain.
Why don't we taste that now? Actually, while you're talking about it, we can start tasting. We can go on to sample number 5, the Gaia. We might as well, since you're talking about it.
I definitely want to get the comment about the Gaia on the call.
Okay.
While we're recording.
So I can give you like some of the specifics on this. This was harvested in the summer of 2015. Spent 136 hours in fermentation, and aged for 3 years, 9 months, and 20 days. And wow. This 42% of it in first fill ex-bourbon casks, 17% in virgin oak, 23% in French, and 18% split in the vin de naturel. So that was split between 1 Madeira cask and 3 port pipes. So this has got the influence of the Madeira and the port in there. But this is
thought so. You know what? It's funny that there was something port. I tend to like port aged whiskeys. I've had a taste of the Amrut Porto Nova, which is amazing. Port aged stuff really speaks to me. And as soon as I took a nose on this, this is amazing.
Yeah. and it's young. I mean, less than 4 years old. All of the Waterfords are. However, I think because of the use of quality casks, because of the dedication and uh, focus that they're doing on making their whiskeys, they've spent 5 million euros on barrels to date.
Wow.
5 million euros on barrels. So lots of barrels sitting there that they're going to be able to do this. This is our most popular off the Waterfords. We sold out of our first shipment within 2 weeks, and had another 40-foot container come in with a variety of things, and we're about to deplete our organic, and we have a little bit more in Scotland, but in Ireland, but there will not be any more organic released this year.
Got it. Well, what's the price point on the Waterfords, by the way?
So the single farms are 95.
Uh-huh.
I'm not sure what Vinny's selling it for, and the organic is 110. Organic's a little
Okay.
bit more. Obviously, the cost of producing organic grain
Right.
is more costly.
Sure. And I don't want to monopolize here. You just answered a lot of questions from me and from Eric. So what I want to do right now is we're going to open up for questions. Eric, if you could moderate and look and see who's raising hands and stuff. And remember, everybody, if you have a question, you have to unmute yourself. Okay. So Eric, if you could moderate this, that'd be great.
Yep. Evan, did you have a question, or are you just holding your glass up? Okay. R.L. Tesher.
I'm not sure if you got to this, but I was just wondering why Waterford decided to dilute everything to exactly 50%.
That seems to be a good spot for them, where you can taste stuff. It's not quite gas strength,
Right.
but it's also not 40%. They're never going to do 40% because that's going to be heavily diluted. But at least this still lets you taste the natural spirit at 50%.
Is there something about what they do that makes it, not work out so well at 40 or 43?
No, I mean, I think it just, you add more water to it. It obviously dilutes it and
Sure.
gives you a lighter spirit, but they certainly wanted it to shine as it is. I mean, you got to remember that the barrels are being filled at like 71-72%, which is very unusual because in Scotland, they're filling the barrels at 61, 62, 62.5. So you're getting high alcohol spirit that's going in there, which is having a greater effect too because of the relationship between the barrels and the spirit. But I think I actually like it at 50%.
I think it's delicious. These are all amazing. I was just wondering about it.
I've tried. I did a couple of last year where we started with 2 new makes and then went on to the other whiskeys, and the new makes, like I said, 142 proof, but they're quite delicious, and they really, talk about terroir. That's where you really notice the terroir.
Thank you.
I think Nolan had a question.
I know that shocks you. I want to start out by saying, Raj, that the Waterford came out in Chicago in I think September, October.
Yep.
And I went out and got a bottle right away purely because I was curious, but also had some expectations considering who put this out there. And I have to say, I was really blown away and still am. It's really amazing whiskey. I think I'm looking forward to seeing the 0.2s and the 0.3s and see how this progresses, because I was on a different tasting with you about a month ago with some guys out from Southern California I'm friends with.
Yep.
And I know that you're going to do the same farms continually, at least in the U.S. for the next couple of years, right?
Possibly. I'm actually, trying to convince them to give us some of the other ones. We did in September or October, I think we did a tasting with Drammers Club where we had 4 of the European makes, 4 US ones, and 2 new makes. And there was one particular European one that a number of people fell in love with, and that was the one they wanted, Ballykilclavin, if you can find it. But I think there's Yeah, there was strategy behind wanting to do specific farms for the U.S. and specific ones for Europe. There's farm released in Ireland. Um, but yeah, we will next year, or sorry, this year we will see versions 1.2. So right now, what you're having is 1.1. 1.2, all that means is that it's the same harvest, the same distillate, but second release of it. So it obviously will be older, and the barrel configurations, the final blend might be a little different. So Ned Gahn, who is the master distiller, may decide, oh, I'm going to use more old ex-American, ex-bourbon cast and less virgin oak in this particular one, just sort of to showcase the differences that it makes.
So you also mentioned earlier that you brought in a Murray McDaniel 28-year-old Jura, and it came in with the tariffs added, and it was $750. Can you kind of give us an idea what that true impact was? If there was no tariffs, would it have been 600 or 650 or?
Yep. So that was a Blackadder 30-year-old Jura.
Oh, I'm sorry, Blackadder.
That's okay. And so the tariff gets added on the value of the good. So if we're paying, let's say we're paying $300 a bottle, right? That's the value of it. Then the tariff, 25% of 300, gets added on to it, and that's what we have to pay on top of the excise tax.
So it's something like about 75 to $100 on that bottle.
On that particular, correct.
Do you think,
if you look at that, sorry, Michael, if you look at it, so that's what we add on to it. We add on the actual cost, but then the multiple effect where distributors and retailers added on to it. So I think I did earlier on when the tariff came in, I did some examples where something that was initially selling at $50 after the tariff would probably be about 60.
Okay. So it added 20% to the cost of the bottle at
25.
retail. 25.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah,
I mean,
that would do it.
At the retail end of it, it added about approximately 20%.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. And then one last question, because otherwise Gil will kick me off. When are you selling another barrel to the boys from Single Cask Nation?
That's a good question. We're in discussion. It's just right now. You mean another Obrut or another something else? But
Obrut specifically.
Yeah. So I actually have Obrut cask samples arriving end of month. 5 different samples. I'm going to decide which ones I'm going to keep because we do our single barrels under the Atma name. So if you see Amrut Atma, those are single barrels that I've selected and we've bottled exclusively for the U.S. The next one coming in is an unpeated barley aged in port for the 7-year-old, which is just fantastic. And it'll probably, I imagine it'll be about 175 retail. We just did a 7-year-old or almost 8-year-old ex-bourbon cask. We only got 90 bottles out of that. And that, as you can imagine,
that's crazy. I got to tell you, man, that's crazy. When you think of the market and you're talking about the number of bottles that you're getting, hey, that is just insane. When you think about people trying to build a collection and trying to get some of this stuff. Yeah.
And there's people, Gil, there's people in Europe who are fanatic Obrut collectors who want everything that comes out and, have like even with fusion or single malt, they have verticals of it. Because if you look at the back of every bottle of Obrut, it has the batch number on it. So if you have batch 1 of fusion versus batch 78, there are going to be slight variances because they're doing everything by hand.
And there's batches on these little bottles too.
Yep, exactly. They have to do that. Yep.
All right. So since you mentioned fusion, this is our last sample of the night. I'd like everybody to take a look at fusion. I'd like everybody to taste fusion. This is different, okay? And I had my first taste of fusion over a decade ago. Tell us what we're about to be drinking, Raj.
Okay, so fusion is Amrut's flagship whiskey. This was released in 2010. So last year was their 10th anniversary of Fusion. Fusion is what they like to call a marriage of East meets West. So 75% of the Indian barley, the single malt, aged separately, aged separately, and 25% of their peated single malt, aged and matured separately. And then they take the 75% of the single malt, 25 of the peated, and marry those together and allow them to marry for about 6 to 9 months before it's bottled. There is no peat in India, so they get the peated barley from Scotland, to peated to their specifications, and it comes and everything else is done at the distillery. So
this is spicy.
Yeah.
This is, it's spicy. It's warming. It's full bodied. There's nothing light about this. It's a good thing you didn't start off with this, as we discussed before.
Well, this is the only one we're doing that has a little bit of peat in it. We could have done a lot more peat and stuff, but this, I think it's got a light amount of peat. You notice it mostly at the back of the throat or back of your palate. It's not in your face peat. And this is 50% or 100 proof. It certainly doesn't drink like that. You get a lot of sort of orange, fennel, citrus notes, a little chocolate, a little cocoa, maybe a little like a sweet barbecue smoke on there. This has won numerous awards, including being named World Whiskey of the Year twice. 95, 96, 97 points by a variety of different reviewers. So this is our biggest selling item in the Armory portfolio, followed by the single malt, which you previously had.
Got it. I got to tell you, this is great, and we're getting some good comments on this stuff too. But again, we have about 10 to 12 minutes left. So, Paul, do you have any questions? You always have questions. I've got to pick on you. Yeah, you have any questions for our friend Raj?
I guess, sure, I've got a couple.
I mean, you don't have to.
Well, this one, it might be uncouth, but I'm going to ask it anyway.
All right.
Because it's a passion question of mine. All right, so Waterford's coming out. Those whiskeys are fantastic. Another country is producing fantastic single malt that's absolutely delicious. And you being an importer, you have a lot of, the world view of a lot of the availability out there. Why is American single malt so comparatively bad?
I take exception to that. I don't think it's bad. I think there are a number of exceptional American single malts that are being produced. But then there are also a lot of, unglamorous, no comment American single malts that are also being produced. I think that the part of the issue is although an association was formed to try and come to some agreement about what an American single malt should be, it hasn't happened yet. They're still arguing about, should it be 2 years, should it be 3 years, should it be new oak, should it be ex oak, ex bourbon, whatever, and until they come to that dedication. I mean, if you look at something like what Matt Hoffman is doing with Westland, the types of different oaks he's using, the different barley strains he's using, they're making really quality single malts. Stranahan's, he was the first one to do single malts, great stuff. When Jess was still there, it's great stuff. But I think, when Rob, there were still some good things coming out of there. I think that'll continue. There's a few others that are doing good stuff, but overall, yeah, I mean, I think they're struggling as classification as something that has greater appeal. I think when you try to compete with Scotch single malts or world whiskey, so when you want to say world single malts, Japanese, Indian, Taiwanese, etc., that's a whole different category. And so where does the American single malt fit into that?
And I think the way that I approach that, or one of the reasons why I ask it that way, is that it seems to me a lot of people are almost running before they're walking in terms of trying to recreate a peated Scotch in America. And, I feel like a little bit of attention could be paid first to the barley itself and a barley forward, nice, classic, unpeated type style. So that's just a thought that I've had. I don't know if you Like,
Yeah,
do
no, I
you-
would agree with you. I mean, I go back to Westland and what
Mhm.
Matt's doing, and the fact that when they do a peated whiskey, they're doing it once a
Yep.
year. He's all about barley forward. The use of special oak, Gariana, other types of oak to really help the whiskey speak for itself. But again, he's one of a handful. The other one, I don't know if
And 100% agree for the record there. Westland is I do
yeah,
really
and
enjoy that.
if anybody's not read, grab Rob
Ooh.
Arnold's book, The Terroir of Whiskey, that just came out, and this, Rob's distilling in Texas. He talks all about the different barley strains, what the terroir factor is. But I think it's worth a read to talk about. He's traveled the world trying to figure out the flavor of place from different countries, and I think it's worth a read.
Thank you.
Okay.
Eric, has anybody else indicated they have a question?
Ariel Eisenberg, then Michael Bloom, then Todd.
Okay.
All right, I know everyone's shocked that I was actually able to keep myself muted for that long. So I'm curious because I know that Gil Rosecrown had actually explored to some very basic extent getting a cask imported at one point many years ago, and nothing came of it. We thought it was going to be like a number of hundreds of bottles. But Raj, you were saying that on some of your casks, you're only getting, were you saying 90 bottles off?
Well, that was an example of an en route cask.
Okay.
A 7-year-old barrel. When you're losing 10 to 15% a year, you don't get a lot left.
Yeah.
But out of Scotland, usually a 53 gallon or a 220 liter cask, you're going to get probably 220 to 40 bottles, depending on the strength you do it at.
So when you're looking at your single farms, how many casks are one of those single farm labels able to produce?
So in this, the Waterford single farms, I'm trying to remember how many they did, because I think at the first fill they probably, it'll vary from whatever the harvest was, but I think they probably had enough to fill maybe 150 casks.
So
That's
pretty
what it-
limited.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
Eric, who was next?
Michael Bloom.
Okay.
So my question, Raj, you've been ahead of the curve on a lot of the importing of the really interesting what's next in whiskey since I've known you, including finishes like rum finishes, which I know you're fond of, and you import rum too. So I wanted to ask you, what's next beyond what we've seen already? Have you seen anything new out there that we haven't talked about tonight?
Well, I think that's a good question. I think that now where single malts are being made everywhere in the world, pretty much. And I think we're going to continue to see a proliferation of single malts coming in. Australia is doing some incredible things. We used to import Sullivan's Cove before it was like the hot kid on the block. The problem with Australia is the prices. Getting the casks over there and then bringing it over here, and the price they sell for, and they like to get the prices that they get over there. Starward is doing something different. They're not only doing single malts, doing some other whiskeys. So that might be the solution to getting some other Australian stuff in there. We're looking at Germany, Denmark as possibilities of where we can get stuff. I'm exploring the market to see what else is available out there. I want to get something unique and different. I'm not interested in having anything in our portfolio that is somebody's doing it just for the hell of doing it. They have no plan about where they're going to go or why they want to grow. It's just like, oh, I want to distill, and that's why I'm doing it. So I think we're going to see a lot of I think we'll see a lot of failures, both in the American market and in world producers as well. I think the Scottish regulation changes have, because it's allowing use of other casks, we'll probably start to see some other cask finishes or cask maturations coming out there. And I think also Waterford with the whole terroir thing has already set off some other distillers on that direction. Some of the newer distillers are paying attention to that and trying to focus on locally sourced barley and using really good quality casks. There's not a lot of distillers that do it. I mean, I think majority of distillers, especially distilleries that are owned by the big boys and girls, tend to want to get as much yield as they can. Care about where the barley comes from. They don't care about where the casks come from or the quality of casks. It's just, let's get it out, let's get it in, let's get it out. And I think we're going to see a change to that. I think consumers are going to demand greater transparency and greater dedication to producing quality products. Authenticity is something that's going to come forth.
Okay. All right. So, Raj, thank you for that. So we have just a few more minutes here. If we can just have the people who want to ask questions, ask them, briefly if possible. Todd, you have a quick question?
I was going to ask the same thing Michael Bloom just asked.
Okay, great. I see. Mike, I don't know you. Welcome. You have a question?
Yeah, I own Travel Bar in Carroll Gardens, Brooklyn. So.
Nice. Welcome.
Thank you. So whiskey bar, 450 whiskeys. A lot of Raj's products are there. But
awesome.
Thank you, Mike.
Raj, I want to ask you, in particular, the en route. Do they ever import over the 25% that's barreled and produced separate? Is it ever on the market, or is there ever a way to taste it by itself before you blend it?
Well, there is. So the single malt, Mike, is the 75% goes in there, and the peated cask strength is the 25% that goes into fusion.
Right.
So if you try,
about the 25%, is there any way to taste that 25%?
The 25% is 25% of the cask strength peated.
Right.
So they're taking, they'll take a component, a part of that, and then part of the single malt cask strength to make fusion. So, it's hard to say the exact one because every batch is going to be slightly different.
But they never bottle the peated by itself.
Yeah, the peated is available.
Okay.
The peated and the peated cask strength, they're both available.
Okay. All right.
Yep.
Yeah, and actually, Raj, I think didn't Blackadder even bottled one of those, right?
But Blackadder's done a number of en route bottlings.
But they've done a peated. They've done peated too, right?
Both. They've done peated and unpeated.
Got it.
The last ones we brought in, one was both unpeated, one in Nicaraguan rum and one in sherry.
Okay, so we have one more question. Lynn, if you can, do you give us our last question, please? Please unmute. Lynn, you have to unmute. You have to unmute.
I'm a big rye lover. And one of the things about rye is the ones I love have a very grassy nose. These are the Waterfords are the very first Irish whiskeys I've had with an intensely grassy nose, which I adore. Why is it the barley? Is this truly the terroir? What's going on here? I love these.
No, thank you. Well, two things. One is it's not it's not your typical Irish whiskey because it's made out of malted barley. It's double distilled, not triple distilled. So that's giving you a richer, more complex spirit than you would get if it was triple distilled. And also, a lot of Irish whiskey, unless it's a single malt, is going to have unmalted, malted, and some grain, corn mostly, distillate that goes into it. So that produces a totally different product.
Great, wonderful. So
what is it about the nose? Why is it grassy though? I mean, that's what I don't understand. Barley's barley, isn't it?
Well, it's not. If you try the, there's, just look at the difference between the organic Gaia and one of the single farms. They're
True.
two different types of barley. So they're producing different flavor profiles. And, you know, this year, when you get to taste other single farm origins that are using other strains of barley, you know, and then later this year, we'll have a biodynamic Waterford. And again, that will have different flavor profiles. So yes, the barley does make a difference. And that's the whole point of Waterford's focus on terroir.
Raj, what do you mean by did you say
biodynamic? That
Yeah.
is a method of farming. A lot of wine producers use it, especially in older parts of Europe, and you even have some California producers do it. So basically, they harvest and do things by the phases of the moon. They'll even do things like taking a cow horn and filling it with cow manure and burying it into the ground. You know, that for having its own nutrients come through in that. There's a lot of practices that go into biodynamic farming. So it's no irrigation, no added irrigation. It's all natural. Everything happens off the land.
Okay, so I want to stop it right now out of respect for Raj's time. We are at 8:02. Raj, we're going to finish this up the same way that we finish up all of these. I'd like everybody, if you are so inclined, to make sure that you have a dram in front of you. If you have already finished your samples, pour the one that you like the most or that you thought was the most interesting or your favorite. And I'm actually going back to the just the Amrut Indian, straight there, you know, Amrut Indians, delicious stuff. And everybody, if you can join me in saying cheers and thank you to Raj Sabharwal.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Cheers.
Lancha.
Everybody can all unmute, just say thank you again. And yeah, this was wonderful. Yeah, Raj, I got to tell you, this was wonderful.
It was amazing.
Incredibly generous. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Raj.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
This was great. All right.